Hi, and welcome to Classical Stuff You Should Know, a podcast about classical education, classical stuff, old things, old books, from young strapping dudes. We're not old. We are three teachers at a school in Austin, Texas, and we like old things and books and classical education, and so we put a podcast together.
Nailed it.
Yep.
But today, let's introduce ourselves. My name is Graham Donaldson, and I am joined by Thomas Fletcher Magby.
Hello.
Or T. Fletch.
I almost said that's
no
me
one.
to that. I'm way off.
What were you going to say?
I almost claimed you as myself. I was almost like,
wow.
that's me. And
Tommy Fletch
Yeah,
and
that's me. Yep.
Arthur Jan Handenberg, colloquially known as AJ.
Yep, that's me. That's actually me.
Is also here.
Yep.
Thank you for listening to us. You can find us on Patreon, where we've got bonus episodes of us just talking about stuff and some other tidbits there. You can check us out on Patreon. So
quite a way to
do
sell
that.
it. Yeah.
What?
We have stuff on there. Yeah.
We got lots of stuff.
You are correct.
I don't
I'm
want
not
to bore
disagreeing
you.
with you. Yeah.
And plus, it's like the sense of mystery.
Good.
Because sometimes...
Imagine there's a disappointment when they log on and find napkin rings or
napkin
something.
ring. Classical stuff you should know, napkin rings. Because,
I'm in.
guys, sometimes, I just feel like I wake up and I just push the boulder up the mountain and it just sometimes just rolls back over me and I go back down and I just roll. I mean, sometimes that's just what life feels like.
Sure.
It's like a Sisyphean task that I have in front of me. Sisyphusian?
Sisyphusan.
Sisyphusian.
Yes. Sorry.
It's
anyway.
Sisyphean, right?
But Handenberg is continuing on his Camus train here. And Camus.
Albert Camus.
And with that introduction, let me jump back in.
You cannot get those 2 minutes back of your life. I'm so sorry.
Oh, man. A few episodes ago, I did Camus'
It's absurd, Magby. It was absurdism.
I did Camus' The Stranger, and I felt a little alienated. Maybe you don't understand that pun yet, but you will. I felt a little alienated because I didn't really understand the philosophy behind the book, right? The book seems very odd, and I think it might be known as an existential book. It is not existential. It is absurdist. And so I wanted to investigate, so I jumped into one of the things that helps to explain his absurd philosophy, which is his essay. And I say essay, it's really long. It's like 120 some pages.
Woof.
So his essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, and it is kind of a little bit of a treatise on what absurdism is and how it works. So boys, you've had the experience that Donaldson described last podcast, probably, of a moment in your life when you experience a truly divine beauty, where the world sort of smiles upon you and nature seems at once to be in communion with your soul. Everything is right, everything is beautiful, and you have that moment of deep joy, right? Where you are in communion with all things.
Not only have I experienced that, I am the walking embodiment of that. No, I was kidding.
I feel it every time I look at you, indeed.
Cool.
Don't call me, man. That's weird.
Sorry. Seriously.
And I'm willing to bet that you have also had what I would maybe consider the opposite experience. I know I have. And he describes this experience where you, for some reason, most of your life live for tomorrow. You live day to day, thinking about the future, thinking about your worries, thinking about your work, thinking about all these things. And then at some point, standing at a train station, standing in an ice cream parlor, everything seems alien to you for some reason. All of that extra tomorrow and the next day and all of this meaning, the things that you were worrying about, sort of drains from the moment. And then you think, why? Why am I in this place? Why am I in this ice cream parlor? Why do we eat frozen cow milk? That's bizarre. And my hands are weird flesh tubes made of goo and a couple of bones in there to keep them wiggling, and everything instantly seems alien. Even the actions of other men seem mechanical and not indescribable, unknowable to you, right? Everything seems weird, and you all of a sudden feel yourself alienated from all that is around you and realize that the way that you think other men might think might not be. You might not have any understanding of how another human brain works. It might work completely differently to yours, and you have trouble explaining the why of many things. And
this is not my beautiful house. This is not my beautiful wife.
Yeah.
That kind of moment.
Yeah, kind of essentially, yes, where you have that feeling of alienation. And this is what the existential writers called nausea, where all of a sudden you feel alienated from your own world. Have you guys felt that? Have you had the opposite feeling? I'm willing to guess that Graham probably hasn't felt it in a while. He seems pretty grounded in his meaning, but
yeah, I don't. I mean, if I have, I haven't mythologized it in my mind and in my memory like I have deep joy to be able to talk about it in the way that I have. You know what I mean? Like, I haven't. We all have our own history of our life, and we've turned it into a story. And as we get older, it gets real different from what actually happened. So if I've had that moment when I was younger or whatever, actually, this does remind. I think I had that moment when I was in a Blockbuster video once.
Yep.
What happened?
I just remember being like, this is so stupid.
What am I doing?
This is
watching things on tape to entertain us, and I'm paying for these stories to watch on a video screen.
Yeah. I like I said, I don't have it as ready at my fingertips with a mythologized story like I do with Deep Joy. So maybe have you?
I've had. I'm not sure.
Are you having it right now, Hannenberger?
Yeah,
I've never felt this. And
we'll find out if I
Hannenberger's
understand
uh-oh.
Because there's I've had those moments of realizing I so totally see the world differently than other people, and like a shock at that. But I don't. It's not the same thing as saying that like life is drained of value or of meaning, or seeing things as meaningless. I wouldn't describe it as that. There are those moments of like feeling alien to a situation, a room, a group of people. I don't know if that's the same thing as the nausea, though.
You would kind of explain it as extreme consciousness, maybe, and where the world around you defies sort of a unifying explanation. I don't know.
Is this like a wake up, sheeple kind of moment where you're like sitting on a subway and you're like, I'm the only free thinker?
You really don't like this stuff, Graham.
Yes, kind of, except sort of. Yeah, we'll get there. I actually don't think it's a terrible philosophy, and I actually experienced this a ton. And just the bizarreness of the world. And it goes back to when I was talking about my experience with my granddad and his death. It's bizarre, right? It was a bizarre feeling, and it defied the feelings and view of death that we usually want to have, either that it is tragic or it is noble or that it is scary. For me, it just felt weird, and I did not feel connected to the world around me. That said, a listener sent in an email and pointed out that I do remember it vividly. So somehow this death affected me. Right. And then the funny thing is, I do have those moments of deep joy logged in my brain. One was when I was at a lake in Canada. Not surprising.
Not surprising. I mean, that's where most of it, deep joy resides.
Yes. A feeling of supreme freedom and joy when I was driving my car. I think I was 16 and I was only a little ways into driving, and it was just a beautiful sunny day and the wind was blowing through my windows and I was carefree and the world was great.
And Death Cab for Cutie was playing.
I actually think the radio was off.
Oh, I thought you said Transatlanticism was playing.
Transatlanticism makes me feel a lot of feelings. I don't know if I've had a deep joy moment.
Okay, never mind.
But the reason I haven't mythologized the feeling of alienation is that happens far more often to me. I feel that things are weird and defy explanation.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you guys had that same experience.
I'll have to listen more to see if I understand it, because I don't have a clear moment in mind when I hear that. I've had days where things or just like strange things happen in succession, but I think I still attribute meaning to those things.
Yeah. Okay, I'm wondering how I should go about this essay, because it's a little bit strangely organized, and I'm wondering if I should just try to explain it as best I can. I think I'm going to try to go through his organization. So he starts, and the first thing is kind of his reason for writing the essay, and the question is suicide. Does man's estrangement from his world require that he opt out of living? And he says, this is the supreme question. All other questions are secondary to this one, because if you can't answer this in the negative, that we should not commit suicide, then nothing else matters. You have to kill yourself. And he says there's only a few people
who are... It's like a crazy starting place, though, right?
It really is. Okay. I mean, okay, so...
It's the Hamlet question, right?
Before I jump into this, we also got another email from a listener about our treatment of depression and how we often talk about it in terms of the church. And I want to be clear that depression is complicated, and that there's both a chemical component and, I think, a spiritual component, and to the degree to which those mix is still unknown to me. I will also say that the classicists would probably say that if there's a chemical component, well, your body is fallen, and some men are more prone to some sins than other sins. The question is it a sin to be depressed? And no, I'm not sure it always is. So just know that we at Classical Stuff want to treat these things seriously. Like, we know there's a chemical component. We know that clinical depression is hard and difficult and real, and we don't fully understand the way that your philosophy, your worldview, your feelings, your choice, your sin works into that. I certainly don't. And I think the same is true of suicide. We might treat it lightheartedly here, but suicide is certainly not a lighthearted thing. And if you are at all contemplating it, hear from us a resounding no, you should not commit suicide. That is a bad idea. So even as we may treat it a little lightly here, know that it's a serious thing. Are you guys with me on that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Great. So his question is, should we commit suicide? Should I stare in the face of an absurd world and off myself? And I have to answer that before anything. And here in the first few pages is where I found the origin of The Stranger, how he wrote that book. He'll talk about it more in depth near the end. Let's see. He defines absurdity. This divorce between man and his life, the actor and his setting, is properly the feeling of absurdity. And he explains a little more. A world that can be explained, even with bad reasons, is a familiar world. But on the other hand, in a universe suddenly divested of illusions and lights, man feels alien, a stranger. Right? The subject of this essay is precisely this relationship between the absurd and suicide, the exact degree to which suicide is a solution to the absurd. So the absurd is kind of an interaction between a world that defies explanation and the man that finds himself desiring a unity of that world, which our author Camus calls nostalgia. So we as humans want a unifying meaning or explanation.
Yeah.
And he points out that all attempts to find one via reason have been failures. And most modern philosophers, including Nietzsche, Kierkegaard, there's a few other ones he mentions here that we'll get to, they all admit that reason is not going to do the job and then somehow have to deal with that absurdity. A man who wants a unifying explanation for things and a world that defies reasonable explanation.
Yeah, I mean, we told you the Enlightenment wouldn't work back in the day, but whatever.
Right, exactly.
No, why is suicide then the answer? Why not just like, well, there's no answer to the absurdity of life, so I'm just going to run out the clock.
Okay, well, we'll get to the suicide answer. So he will answer that, but that's the question: is your world defies explanation. Your reason is never going to do it. You cannot find this unifying principle, yet you still desire one. You have this nostalgia. So what do you do with it? This is the absurdity, the divorce you feel between those two things.
So he takes the fact that there is no understandable explanation, that the question does not have an answer. He takes that as a given. And since that's a given, now what do we do?
Point to other philosophers who have tried to reconcile those things, say that they have failed, and then continue from there. He's not just asserting it. He will prove that point.
The Enlightenment project did fail.
Yes, he's saying you can't do it with reason. So does the absurd dictate death? You have two options if you want to resolve this tension. Either you commit intellectual suicide and you say, and you find some sort of loophole you can get out of it to find a unifying theory, and he'll point out a few philosophers who did it, or you commit physical suicide.
You lie to yourself.
Either you lie to yourself, or you make some sort of logical leap, or you deny reason altogether, which he's not willing to do, or you commit physical suicide. He says those seem to be my two options, right? I cannot know unless I pursue without reckless passion in the sole light of evidence the reason of which I am here suggesting the source. This is what I call an absurd reasoning.
Why is there not a third option of having faith life, in moving forward that we just haven't got the answer yet, but we can still find it? Why does he say, it's not, we did it all and we're now at the end of intellectual life and we didn't find it, so now we got to wrestle with that? How come there's not like a faith in the project continuing forward?
I mean, he's pointed out that it doesn't work, and that
but why not?
You are part of it is that you are an individual, and thereby in your individuality deny the unity that you seek. Right? You are alone and solely alone, and not a unity of these things. And what you are looking for is a unity you yourself negate. It's a weird answer, and I'm not sure it's fully satisfying. Yeah. But it's kind of an assumption. It's not going to get there. If there is a God, I do not currently know him, and I am not satisfied with the evidence. Right? And I cannot know him through reason. And so I want to apply my reason to the life that I am here living. So that's kind of the beginning. He talks about the reason for his essay. And then they can talk about the awakening of man. And so here's where I'm going to describe this feeling of absurdity that you guys might connect to. Are you ready?
Okay.
It's a little bit longer of a quote, but here it is. I hope my audience is with me. A step lower and strangeness creeps in. Perceiving that the world is dense, sensing to what a degree a stone is foreign and irreducible to us, with what intensity nature or a landscape can negate us. At the heart of all beauty lies something inhuman, and these hills, the softness of the sky, the outline of these trees at this very minute lose the illusory meaning with which we had clothed them, henceforth more remote than a lost paradise. The primitive hostility of the world rises up to face us across a millennia. For a second, we cease to understand it because for centuries we have understood in it solely the images and designs that we had attributed to it beforehand, because henceforth we lack the power to make use of that artifice. The world evades us because it becomes itself again. That stage scenery, masked by habit, becomes again what it is. It withdraws at a distance from us. Just as there are days when under the familiar face of a woman we see as a stranger her we had loved months or years ago, perhaps we shall even desire what suddenly leaves us perhaps we shall come even to desire what suddenly leaves us so alone. But the time has not yet come. Just one thing. That denseness and that strangeness of the world is the absurd. Right? That discomfort in the face of man's own inhumanity, this incalculable tumble before the image of what we are, this nausea, of a writer today calls it, is also the absurd. Right? There seems to be one thing we are sure of, and that is death. Death is coming for us, and that's what we deal with. So did that help you connect with it at all?
Is this the big pit that they scream at in Garden State?
Yes. I mean, is the
yeah,
big death?
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
As Iron and Wine will start playing in the background
Yeah, exactly.
as we keep talking.
Was it
Yeah,
Iron
good for
Wine
you.
or was it? Maybe it was Iron Wine. I thought it was. Broken Bells.
I don't remember.
It's a hipster movie, kids. Go Google it.
Don't.
Actually,
Just don't.
yeah. Shoot. Yes, I get it. I think. I wonder if what we were describing with the deep joy of romanticism as like a small little glimpse of what we were made for in terms of heaven, if what he's describing is not the small little glimpse of what we could be made for in hell. Like this, so like
disunity.
So there, this idea of that Earth and like our terrestrial existence ends up being like the antechamber to is that the antechamber? Like the beginning,
part, yes.
The beginning of either one of those realities. So like your time on Earth could have been like a prelude to heaven, and everything was leading you towards that, or your time on Earth could be a prelude to hell and leading you towards that alienation, that aloneness, that being a stranger to reality. And I wonder if what Camus is describing is feelings where that being the destination, if things keep on trucking the way they're going, oh my goodness, this is what it means. If he's not describing like anti-deep joy.
Yeah, because then that would... I've had those encounters with friends from high school that you see them 10 years down the line and they have moved closer to hell than they have to heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And in that way is a picture toward that. But that still attributes a meaning to... I'm able to look at that and say...
You are, but they look at it and they say
Correct.
crazy madness. They say meaninglessness.
But that's why I'm having trouble with this, because I would need to see it as meaningless, not as pointed toward hell. Correct? Isn't that?
Yeah, it's not. There is
It's the
to the
absurdity
absurd man. There is no future life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
There is nothing after death because it's unknowable. Right? Here's another quote: "Of whom and of what indeed can I say? I know that this heart within me I can feel, and I judge that it exists. This world I can touch, and I likewise judge that it exists. There ends all my knowledge, and the rest is construction." So if you strip away all that man has constructed to explain his world, this is what we have. We know that that's going to end in death, and this is the absurd. I want something to explain everything, but my reason can't do it.
why not?
Because it
Well, you
can't.
agree-
It literally
you agree with
cannot
that
fail.
part.
I mean, sorry, it can't.
You agree with the Enlightenment part, Graham, that reason alone is not sufficient to
Correct.
give a reason.
It does not surprise me that Camus looks back and says, we've been working towards a grand unifying theory of meaning using reason alone, and it didn't work.
It didn't work.
So now what do we do?
We know it didn't work, and that's what he explains in the part just preceding to the part that I read. Right, this very heart which is mine will forever remain indefinable to me. Between the certainty I have of my existence and the content I try to give to that assurance, the gap will never be filled. Forever I shall be a stranger to myself. Right? it's as far as we can go.
Again, Graham and I are probably not going to buy this for most of the episode, right? Like, there is a part of us that is secret to ourselves. There is also self-knowledge that is possible. There is also actually meaning to everything that happens around us. So that's, yeah. I do not, in listening to this, I don't have a time that I associate with this. I'll have to keep listening, though. I'm sure there's more. Again, I'm sure there's something that connects with me
maybe
more.
you might never have had this experience.
Yeah.
What they call, I certainly have, and not that it's the world defies any explanation. It's just a sudden feeling of alienation and of resistance to, I think, what I mentioned. It might have been in our banter in between episodes. It might have been in the last episode, but how much of the meaning of everyday phenomena comes from assigned human meanings, right? Just like a knife has cut you up the middle. If a surgeon did it, it's surgery. If a killer did it, it's murder. The knife did the same thing, one way or the other.
Yeah, but we don't tell history from the knife's perspective.
And that's just the point, is that the knife did a thing. That is what is real. Everything else that we are adding to it is human construction. The history was human. The meaning was human. The words murder and
so the interpretation,
surgery, the interpretation is all
but the knife doesn't,
human.
The knife doesn't do anything. It's either a murderer or a doctor who
right.
is
in truth, it was just a person. His motives are even more different than what's real in reality, right? His motives aren't real, and so
he
it's
has
just a thing that happened.
He has no faith that he can ascribe the same level of humanity that he has to another person. So it's like this is the problem of solipsism, right? How can I ever know that the reason someone does what they're doing is because of the reasons that I do what I'm doing?
Well, I think he feels confident that he can do it he says other people are unknowable. I myself am partially unknowable. The world is a confusing thing and that I want to unify.
And why is he writing an essay?
So we'll get to the difficulties.
Right. He'll answer that question
there in a little bit. Yeah, he actually will answer. Have you read this before?
Yes. Ultimately, Camus doesn't commit suicide, right? So he must have it. If Camus takes as his starting place, either kill yourself or don't, he has answered the question to say we shouldn't kill ourselves.
Isn't it the struggle? The rock.
In this, you said it's not existentialism. It's kind of existential because that meaning is self-created, right? At some point, I guess we'll get whatever. We'll get into more of that stuff later. But
yeah. So if you guys are resisting this, it would make sense because you are people who believe in a world after this one, right? Which adds this unity of meaning to the world that we otherwise can't have. If you don't believe in that other world after this one, if you just want what your reason can give you, you cannot get to that other world. It is not a reasonable thing. And so if he is like, I want just what my reason can give me and only that, and I'm not going to add anything else to it, then you end in the world of the absurd.
Okay, Chesterton's got a great line about people who are hyper-rational, or people who only want to live in the realm of reason are crazy people.
Yes.
Are the people that think the movement of every blade of grass has some sort of like conspiracy against them.
Okay. So let me do some more summary here really fast
exactly.
because we can get to the discussion of the theory in a minute.
Yeah.
So he then points out a few philosophers that sort of start where he starts and then do the intellectual suicide thing, right? They see the walls closing in on them. They realize that they cannot explain the universe, and so they have to figure out some way to explain the chaos. They are them. They want a unity. The world is not unifiable, and so what do they do?
That's quite fun. Who does he name?
He talks about Jaspers, and he says reason's failure proves transcendence. That's what
Butler?
Jaspers says.
This is Butler.
And
Jaspers,
Yes,
what do you think about the meaning of life?
He asked his butler.
apparently,
Yes, exactly.
his butler says it's because reason has failed that proves that there is something that transcends reason, and that proves that the world is transcendent. And that is how he dodges the question.
Sure.
And he's like, but that's a logical leap. Just because your reason failed doesn't prove that there is an ethereal thing out there called transcendence. It just means your reason has failed to explain it.
Sure.
It might be chaos.
Nice try,
Then he
Jaspers.
talks about a guy named Chestov who ends up saying that the absurd is God.
Okay.
That everything that defies our explanation is God. And he's like, yeah, except the point of the absurd is that it negates God, right? Like there is no unifying principle. And so that's kind of an intellectual leap. He also talks about Kierkegaard, who requires the sacrifice of the intellect.
Oh,
like,
he does not anyone, but Kierkegaard's my boy.
Good for you.
Sorry.
he basically says the absurd is a criterion for another world, and in that we find God. And he's like, yes, but that requires that I sacrifice my intellect, which is the one thing I am not going to do. I am going to retain my intellect and drive it to its conclusion And if you want to construct something else out of that, I won't accept it. I want what you can show me in this world.
What's his argument for Kierkegaard sacrificing his intellect? Does
I don't
he
know.
get into it?
So
Okay.
to be honest, this is a really hard to understand essay. It's very French, and he uses a lot of
Gotcha.
ethereals, and he goes in a lot of circles. And I don't know if it's not so much a clear argumentation as sort of a description of feeling.
Do you want me to give like a one sentence synopsis of Kierkegaard or no?
Sure, yeah, that'd be helpful.
So Kierkegaard took the story of Abraham, God telling Abraham, hey, you're going to have an entire nation from your son Isaac. And hey, I want you to sacrifice Isaac on this mountain. And Abraham being like, okay, to both of those things and going up and willing to sacrifice Isaac on the mountain as the story of how mankind should live outside of the bounds of reason, having faith in being this person of like, what is it? A night of infinite resignation or something like that. Anyway,
There you go, resigning.
Yeah, but having the idea that like the faith in the unreasonable request from God is the position that mankind should take, is to sort of open themselves up in faith to what seems absurd, I guess. And then Camus says like, well, I'm not willing to do that. I'm not opening myself up to having faith in that the promise will play itself out in the light of the promise seemingly unreasonable.
Okay.
Anyway.
Sure. All right, we
got to do an episode on Kierkegaard.
Let me hustle through, but yeah,
All right.
Kierkegaard's great.
We'll get some
Let me
either
hustle
or.
through a little bit more. So here's Camus' position. He says, I want to know whether I can live with what I know and with that alone. I am told again that here the intelligence must sacrifice its pride and reason bow down. But if I recognize the limits of reason, I do not therefore negate it, recognizing its relative powers. I merely want to remain in this middle path where the intelligence can remain clear. So maintain what the intelligence can establish, not get rid of it, right? Absurdity doesn't require total chaos.
Right.
He says, I can be reasonable to a point, but at a certain point it becomes either metaphor, like when we're talking about physics, when we get to atoms, we explain it not really exactly what's happening, but an approximation. We get to poetry, right? He's like, I want to stay where reason can actually talk. And then he sort of gives us the feeling of the stranger and where that comes from. Like he gives it sort of a design of what that guy looks like. He feels that all things are innocent, right? He's assured there's a sin of, here, I'll just read it.
He's describing Merceau, the guy from The Stranger, or
well, no, he's kind of talking about the absurd man, and it sounds
general,
crazy similar to the actual character,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
All he can reply is that he doesn't fully understand that it's not obvious, right? He's asked to leap, right? To a leap to the gods, and he's like, I don't get it. It's not obvious to me. Indeed, he does not want to do anything but what he fully understands. He is assured that this is the sin of pride, but he doesn't understand the notion of sin, that perhaps hell is in store, but he has not enough imagination to visualize that strange future. That he is losing immortal life, but that seems to him an idle consideration. An attempt is made to get him to admit his guilt. He feels innocent. To tell the truth, that is all he feels, his irreparable innocence. This is what allows him everything. Hence, what he demands of himself is to live solely with what he knows, to accommodate himself to what he is, and to bring in nothing that is not certain. He is told that nothing is, but this at least is a certainty. And it is with this that he is concerned. He wants to find out if it is possible to live without appeal.
That man does not exist. That is a construction of Camus. Camus wants that man to exist, but man does not
that's
exist.
his point. Is the absurd man that you have to have a focused attention to keep these little explanations and this intellectual suicide from sort of breaking in on you. Yep. This is how he wants to live. He feels that he is innocent because all assignments of guilt come from one of those big explanations of all the people, and he's like, I feel innocent. I've done nothing wrong. All of this extra stuff you're putting on me is nothing to what I see. And he brings that right into his answer about suicide. He says that life will be lived all the better if it has no meaning. Living an experience, a particular fate, is accepting it fully, right? So to live out the absurd life is a conscious revolt against this weird opposition he feels. And that is sort of freedom, right? It is not aspiration. It's devoid of hope. That revolt is the certainty of crushing fate without the resignation that ought to accompany it. So I see that I will die. I know that that's true. I am a slave to it. But I will live and accumulate as much experience as I can before I die and revolt against that truth. And in doing that, not resign myself to this death, right? And he goes on to talk about freedom in a really similar way to Fight Club. Basically, once you hit bottom and you have hopelessness, you are free to do whatever, right? If I strip all meanings from all things, then, and really all I'm trying to do is accumulate sensual experience, not sensual as a sexy, but sense experience and that sort of thing, then anything is really permitted. Like, there might be consequences, sure. You don't have to say that they aren't there, but I am like, everything is equal because it's all going to be swallowed up in death anyway. And it's better to live it as fully as I can before I kick it, right?
This is the arguments that the Vikings made in the Ballad of the White Horse.
Yes.
The Guthrum and Ogier and Elf and the other guy, I can't remember his name, making the argument about varying degrees of, since there's nothing in the end, either eat, drink, tomorrow we die, or, accumulating sensual experiences, or just like you find your meaning in the fight, which is what Guthrum gets to. It's like there's some moment in the middle of bloodlust where you feel alive and everything else is just is a death. So you fight to get those moments of feeling alive. This is what it sounds like.
You are here to accumulate experience, right? You are alive now, tomorrow you die, and that certainty of death, that coming negation, provides you a certain freedom, right? You are either a slave to this unifying idea that you had of the world, right? Like you fellows are slaves to Christianity. You
Dang.
are, right?
What'd you say?
I said, dang.
Oh.
I mean, God, the Bible makes no hemming and hawing about that. You are a bond slave of Jesus Christ.
Correct.
Right? It does not beat around the bush. You are a slave to it, right? You are either a slave to this thing,
Galatians 4.
Yeah.
or you are a slave to your ultimate coming death. And in that, you can be resigned to it and find a freedom. Doesn't matter. Should I write a book? Well, it doesn't really matter.
So you
Why
can choose
not?
whether you do or not.
I do or not. And so he begins to say that the eye sort of becomes this roving camera where you can record all sensual experience and not necessarily put all these extra judgments upon it. He goes on to give sort of 3 sketches of this kind of man. One is Don Juan.
Does each person get to make that decision? So, say for Don Juan, is he right to make whatever choice he eventually makes for does he get to choose his own source of happiness? Right? Does each person get to have that freedom to do that?
Happiness is a weird thing that he only addresses at the very end. The importance seems to be revolt.
Purpose, whatever.
Right?
Yeah. Can I revolt however I want to?
Yeah, sure. He actually gives 3 sketches. So Don Juan finds his sensual experience in many women, right? He's like, why do I have to love one woman to love deeply? I can love deeply many, many women. And in that, find my rebellion from everything else, right? I think he's possibly misunderstanding Don Juan, but I think Don Juan was maybe sunk in lust and was not necessarily thinking of conscious revolt against the absurd, right?
But Don Juan will never have the experience of loving only one woman.
That's true.
But he didn't want that experience. Right?
I mean, he that's the thing is, as long as he is conscious of his absurd state in the universe, it doesn't matter which he chooses.
Either way, right?
There's choosing
equal meaning to either in Camus' view.
Oh, well,
he is choosing to revolt against death.
Right.
I mean, that's the thing. Like that, you are feeling the freedom that he has provided for you, where you can do whatever you want to.
It's like that gif of the guy in his office. He's just like smacking his keyboard and flipping pages over, and he's like, "Oh, screw this, screw this, screw this."
The important thing is that you get quantity, right? Like as much life as you can have, because
so maybe as a completionist of video games, this should appeal to you. Somebody who enjoys getting that little 100% Steam achievement, at least back in your former days.
Yeah, think about that like life, getting the achievements for life.
I have said many times it's the wrong way to play video games. In the same way that when I read a book, if I get past page 70, I will finish that book. That is a horrible way to read books.
You get the little achievement pops up when you're done.
After I finish a book, when I finish Purgatory, I'll get that on my merit badge list. Yeah. Anyway, no, this is not good.
Yeah. So he talks about Don Juan, the conqueror, and the actor as the 3 sort of paragons examples. I don't feel like I need to go into that. He sort of shows it how it plays out in these 3 types of people, and how like the artist marries themselves to their art and sacrifices and like through all of the things that they live this crazy experience.
So they're sensualists all in just various different ways.
Yeah,
the
sensualists
artist,
in very different ways.
The lover, and what was the third one?
Conqueror.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I gotcha.
So
the Vikings of
he multiplies his personality, right? He works out the thing he's sure of, which is himself, in his art form, which is his conquering.
Yep.
And then he asks the question, well, can you do art as an absurdist? Like, does the fact that you're going to die mean that no art is possible? He says, well, you can do art so long as it's absurdist, right? That it recognizes that there is no unifying principle and that you don't attempt to give the world the unifying principle. Then the novel becomes a revolt. And you can just as soon choose not to write it. It doesn't matter, because you are under the freedom of this that you will eventually die. So write the book. Doesn't matter. There's no prosperity. You're not going to live to see it. If you want to do it to express yourself and to have more experience, that's fine, as long as you're conscious and you are not falling back into the slavery of the nostalgia for unity. You guys tracking so far?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. And then he kind of explains what he means by... He talks a little bit about the brothers K.
I would not want Albert Camus to marry my sister.
Yeah, probably not.
After reading The Stranger, you don't probably want Meursault anywhere near your family either, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So he does his about writing, and then he talks about Dostoevsky, and some of the characters there are dealing with these big questions, right? Dostoevsky himself dealt with these big questions, and so he has...
Does he name characters? Like Ivan from Brothers K?
Yeah, that's one of the ones he names.
Yeah.
He says, weirdly enough, it seems like Dostoevsky's on the side of Ivan. He has to... That bit was written in like 2 weeks because that's how he felt. And then the rest of it was
argument to
written
Ivan.
in like 3 months. And it requires humiliation and shame. Like that's his answer to all of these things that Ivan brings up. Right. If you're curious about that, you can go back and listen to our episode, The Grand Inquisitor.
Yes, but Alyosha still kisses him at the end.
Right. And he mentions a guy named Kirillov who eventually commits suicide. His revolt is suicide. He says,
so's Ivan's.
I don't believe God exists.
Yeah.
And in that I am God. And so the only way that I can express my true freedom is through suicide. That is how I will like revolt against the thing that has made me and show that I have the power over my own life, is to end it.
Sure. But so then Camus really doesn't care about the answer to the question then, right? So if he's posing, why should one not kill oneself? Someone could still choose to kill themselves to show their freedom.
That's their revolt.
Correct? Yeah, right. Don't those both exist within this?
I need to read that part again to correctly answer this question, I think.
Yeah. But maybe he would say most people should not or don't have to, I guess. There's no command. The meaninglessness of life would not dictate that people have to do this.
I remember watching an interview with Ethan Hawke, the actor, and they're asking like a very sort of, milquetoast question, like, so Ethan, why did you decide to be an actor? And he looked at the camera, looked at the interviewer and said, like, the first question one needs to ask is, why wouldn't you kill yourself? And then when you've answered that question, then you can answer why you're an actor. And I was like, this is why I don't like Ethan.
That's fair.
All right. And lastly, the last little section is when he talks about the myth of Sisyphus and why Sisyphus is an ideal for the absurd man. So he stole the secrets of the gods. He wanted to test his wife's love, so he told her to chuck him in the public square when he was dead. And apparently she did. And so he wanted to go back and yell at his wife, but while he was up there, he had such a good time that he didn't want to come back. So he sort of like set up shop on the coast of Italy and was just enjoying the water and the sun and everything. And finally the gods are like, all right, man, you can't be up here anymore. You're a shade. It's time to go back down. And that's when his rock was waiting for him. And then his like walk back down the mountain is sort of that consistent revolt. Yes, he is resigned to his fate, but it's his rock. This is his fate.
Yeah, God gave it to him though.
Yeah, but he is resigned to it. Now that this is his world, he can live freely within it. And he even goes so far as to say you have to imagine him as a happy man. He's a happy character. One must imagine Sisyphus happy is the very end. Mm-hmm. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart, right? The universe the verse is dark, and he's going to leave him at the foot of the mountain, looking up and saying that this is the thing that he is left with, and he can live it and choose to live it in revolt of what the gods have given him, and turn down and trod down the mountain, and then turn around and lift the rock back up again, and rejoice in his fate that he has sort of been a revolting in the sense of he expressed revolt to characters of the gods.
The happiness of man is just the perpetual exercising of your will.
Yes. Yeah, he says that this is the magnificence of man, is his expression of his own freedom in that hopelessness, right? This is what lends life all of its importance, all of its grandeur, all of its nobility, is man's revolt against this weird duality of an unknowable universe and the unity he wants. He revolts against it, and he lives not adding any extra crazy meaning to things, but living out what he's got and adhering to his intellect.
So those overarching stories of meaning must be thrown off, such
Yes.
that to get to the point then where it's my ultimate freedom, my ultimate choice that dictates what I do, even if it's functionally a meaningless task pushing a rock up a mountain, I can still attribute full meaning to that, right?
Yeah.
And still live a full life that way.
So living only in the bounds of your own willpower and ascribing what you do and you will to do as the universe, as the container of your meaning, is also, ironically, how Milton describes hell. Like carrying the hell within you, I myself am hell. So Camus is just saying like, yeah. And Sisyphus is happy there because he has his own, because he gets to do it all on his own. He gets like, it's his playground. It's his willpower. That the only action that we have in this universe is to basically like hold up our middle finger to the universe and say like, screw you, universe, I'm going to do whatever I want. Not necessarily an attractive philosophy to me.
Do you agree with that characterization?
So if you guys would like, we can move from expressing the philosophy to critiquing it.
Have you finished the
essentially
the essays
that's the essay.
Part, yeah.
Is
well, I mean, so
suicide is not necessary. We can live in revolt against this weird absurdity that we feel in the universe. So instead of trying to bring meaning to my grandpa's death, I can just say, yeah, it was weird.
So people who may not know, Sisyphus, he was resigned to pushing a rock to the top of the hill and then it always rolling back and him not being able to complete the task and him going back and doing it again.
Yep.
So just if
forever,
people didn't know,
right?
for forever.
And not he would never die was the other part of that.
So
right?
people didn't know that reference.
He's a rock lifter. That's his job now, forever.
What Sisyphus does.
So if someone calls something a Sisyphean task, it is you cannot accomplish it, or it's really, really hard. And
it kind of means meaningless, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Which would be, again, in contradiction to what Camus is saying.
Yeah.
So if someone helped him out and like got the rock to the top, Camus would say Sisyphus would be sad.
Because there's no more work.
Because there's no more meaning.
I don't know. Then his world is
thing.
larger, and he does not have to ascribe guilt or like he's innocent, and the world is as it is. And this is the thing about absurdity: is it removes all hierarchy. So the general is just as good as the peasant. There is no difference to them. They will both eventually die. They can either live out their revolt with full consciousness, or they can be slaves to the unifying idea.
How come the living out of my revolt can't be expressed in the vast slaughter of my enemies and have that be fine?
It could be.
Sure. Yeah, he actually talks about the conqueror. Do it.
So
it will be met with the consequence of dying, most likely.
Yeah,
right?
you'll be killed for it.
You're not free of consequence, but
I am innocent.
That doesn't negate consequences. He addresses that. Yeah. Just because you feel innocent doesn't change that people are going to kill you for it.
Right, exactly. But those are lesser people. Those are, right? Isn't that the...
Oh, they're people just like you are. They just might be enslaved to a unifying principle that they've cooked up out of nowhere, and you know that that's coming from nowhere and is not jiving with the intellect.
Yeah. So we're back to great man. Maybe it's not the exact same as great man theory, but it seems pretty close, right? Mm-hmm. Some people throw off the shackles and some people don't.
But that has an inherent that has an inherent greater lesser, and this doesn't. This is the evening of the playing field. Everyone is equal. We're all
Then there's the
he would say the people who believe in an overarching theory are lesser in some sense.
Which is honestly the trouble.
All the normies are, they're
incomplete. Don't see things clearly.
Yes, they have just
their intellect is not awakened.
Just taking what the world gives them as given.
So here's
thinking
the thing.
for themselves like me.
Yeah,
I think that in the absence of the eternal, this is a pretty satisfying philosophy. I think if I wasn't a Christian, this is pretty compelling.
Well, if you're not a Christian, what else is there?
And that's exactly the point. Is when you have no assurance of the eternal world, then this is what you've got, but I'm not even sure it's satisfying. So here's my critique of this, even internally, not necessarily externally, not having to prove the eternal life and then coming back to this.
Yeah.
These are internal problems. He says that revolt is what lends all of nobility and magnificence to man's life. But the problem is nobility and magnificence are value judgments that cannot be arrived to by reason.
Rationally,
right? Any value judgment like that, magnificence, maybe nobility. How does intellect establish nobility. It doesn't. If he wants to chase his intellect to its absolute bitter end, it must mean the removal of all value judgments. We see ourselves here. What is to say what is good or bad? And in fact, he even kind of tries to say that. We are all innocent. There is no overarching meaning. And so if there's no overarching meaning, nothing can be noble. Right. He does the thing that Chesterton points out. All these guys, Nietzsche with his higher and greater, and what they really want to say is it's better. More good. Yep. It's better. Right. And what they are trying to do is dodge that by using words like magnificent or noble or things like that. But that's what they mean, is it's better. It's a good thing. Right. But they have to get their notion of good from somewhere other than reason, because reason cannot provide it.
Yeah, this reminds me of... there was a scientific journal article about somebody who had received a brain injury. And essentially what had happened with their brain was the part of the brain that was damaged was the brain that sort of reacts instinctively, or I'm remembering it poorly, and I'm not scientifically adept enough to know the differences. Essentially, functionally, what ended up happening to this individual was that their brain was... function mostly on being hyper rational. And what got people interested in this character was that he wouldn't get out of bed in the morning. And when someone would say, well, why you got to get up in bed and go to work? The question of why should I get up and why should I go to work and all these sorts of things led him down to just sort of like continually asking these questions of, well, why am I doing this kind of thing? And because he couldn't get to any sort of answer, he remained essentially motionless in bed. So I think it started off where he had, I think he had even was a railway worker and had gotten like a spike up his nose in an accident, and it punctured his brain.
This guy. Yeah, he's famous.
And
if we're talking about the same guy.
And so he was stuck in bed, and they were like, well, why is this guy not getting up? He's healthy enough to move around. Why won't he actually get out? And he was also thinking about, like, should I get up on the left side of the bed or right side of the bed? Which side of the bed is the better side of the bed for me to get up on? And he was trying to sort of continuously ask this question about what was the rational thing to do in the morning, and he couldn't get to the conclusion I should get up and go eat and go to work, because even the idea of eating is better than not eating was broken.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. For listeners who don't understand why rationality cannot provide senses of nobility or good, I mean, you can keep on asking questions about why I should do a certain action. Like, why should I get up and eat? Well, because it's going to make you healthy, and because being alive is good. Well,
what does that mean?
Yeah. How do you know it's good? It's simply that we seem to prefer being alive over being dead, and we have no experience of what it's like to be dead. It could be just fine, especially if you're having kind of a bad day. How do you know that being dead is not preferable?
And so this is what he's getting to.
And even human life, like, why is life a good thing? Why must those things that are alive try to perpetuate their own life? Why is an alive squirrel any better than a dead rock? There is nothing in reason that says it is, simply that we seem to prefer it. What is there? How does reason prove that conscious revolt, is any better than senseless slavery to a unifying idea? There's nothing in reason that says it is better. There is only something in ethics and grounded in what C.S. Lewis calls the Tao that can provide that notion of good or evil. Good or evil are senseless when it comes to reason. Reason cannot prove them. Reason simply can say what is advantageous to life or yourself, but why should you have the advantage over other people? And simply because you seem to like it. So it becomes a question of preference, right? And he cannot provide this. My other big... And this...
Well, just before you move on from the Tao, like, this ended up being the big crux of that famous debate between... Peterson and who's that new atheist? Sam Harris. Yeah. And this is what they sort of drilled down on, was the idea of how do you make value and moral judgments if you don't believe that in sort of objective value and morals. Peterson coming from the objective values and moral side, Harris coming from the instinct and preference side, and it was a really great sort of good debate. Anyway, so
yeah, and then. So he kind of appeals to a system that he himself is trying to abandon, and that's why you guys say, why write the essay? Mm-hmm. And that's the point. He would say because it is an expression of his revolt, and he's chosen it freely.
So you're trying to convince me?
But that's the thing, is I could never say that it's better that he did. And he couldn't say that it's better that he did. He might say it's noble or it's a magnificent expression of his revolt, but what does that mean except it's good?
Do you think he cares about convincing people, or
he uses those words repeatedly? That revolt is like conscious revolt is what brings splendor to a man's life, and splendor. What does that mean except goodness? Yeah. That Chesterton points out that all these guys try to appeal to it without ever establishing it with their reason. And the funny thing is you pointed out the thing about Milton. Here he's talking about the character.
They're talking about hell, just or one's gilding it.
Yes, well, like we can reign in hell. What does that mean? Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven.
Correct.
Yep. So he is talking about a character named Kirilov, the guy who kills himself as sort of a form of protest to show that he is. Like, he realizes that God doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. That means he is God. And to show it, he kills himself, right? I am in charge of my own life. I will show that by ending it. And the character at the end of The Brothers K says, we shall meet again. Like, the one of us will die. There's a sick kid that's going to die. And he's like, we will all tell each other how it went. We're going to meet together in the afterlife. Like, there is something after this, and expresses that. And this is what Camus writes right after. There is no longer any question of suicide or madness. What is the use for anyone who is sure of immortality and its joys? Man exchanges his divinity for happiness. And that, I think, is the thing that C.S. Lewis is expressing. It's the thing that Chesterton expresses. This is the choice between personal divinity, which means I am God, or happiness. Happiness in slavery to a unifying idea. And that is the single thing.
Living in the Matrix.
Right. I want to be God, and so I will sacrifice my happiness for that divinity. Right. Or I want happiness, and I will sacrifice being in charge of my life for that happiness.
To submitting to some mythos or whatever.
To submitting to some mythos. And that is where I think he expresses the same sentiment that the devil expresses, that many of these philosophies express, that he wants to be God in charge of his own life, and he sees it as noble. And even if it means sacrificing happiness.
You sounded more positive about The Stranger a few weeks ago than you're sounding now. Have you changed your mind from reading The Myth of Sisyphus, or?
So here's the thing. I really wish this podcast was longer, because my next question was going to be, what is good that we can take from this? And what are Christian principles? And I think that there are a few. Right. And
because again, I said this last time, I'll say it again, that freedom that you have from realizing there are things that don't matter, I think is really helpful. And the idea of defining a value for your life and yourself, I think is also really helpful. But there have to be boundaries around you can become a conqueror and kill as many people as you want. And that's equal to becoming Saint Teresa. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And there has to be some way of recognizing better and worse goals in life. But that idea of freedom of action, I think, is really helpful to take from this. Yeah.
So here's where I kind of land. I think his notion of freedom under the impending certainty of death is a good one, especially for Christians, right? If you accept the doctrine, the unifying doctrine that, like, I have to leave it and leave a legacy and be famous and have my progeny,
change the world.
The world is going to be obliterated, whether you change it or not. It's going away, right? And but hold on,
new heaven, new earth.
Right.
So yeah, new heaven, new earth. So but on an eternal scale, you are absolutely certain of your knowledge that you will live for an eternity, and that turns the volume down on everything that happens in this life, because it occupies literally no space. Right. But there are things we do in this life that affect eternity, and those are the things that matter. Anything that is not eternal will be swallowed up in this eternity, I think, as far as it from the Christian ethos perspective.
Kings bring in their treasures in Revelation. Like, there's we have resurrected bodies. There's a new earth. There are things that will, it's a related point to what you're saying, but there's more, I think, that's eternal than, I don't know.
Yeah, wouldn't it be more fair to say, instead of saying that there is a meaninglessness, or that it turns down the volume on things on this earth, because in light of eternity, wouldn't it be more fair to say that
it turns up the volume?
No. For the person who loves God and for the person who is now in Christ, eternity has begun.
Is now. Yes.
And so the things that you're doing right now, it's not like, we just have to run out the clock until we get to heaven. It's actually, God has called us to live heavenly now.
Yeah.
And so We do that now.
Yeah.
Yes. So
then the volume is turned up in everything we do. So we should be a little concerned if we're just wasting our time or living for cash or whatever.
Here's the way that I kind of talk about nihilism, the hopelessness that he's sort of addressing here is that everything that we have is both infinitely meaningful and infinitely meaningless.
He says that?
No, this is how I talk about it. Yeah. And this is probably his perspective too. Everything we do matters because it's the only thing we'll ever have, but it doesn't matter because we'll die and it'll go away. I think that he finds obliteration of the now in the void, and Christians can find obliteration of the now in the eternal, which is way different. So these things that we have will last forever, and we'll have the thing is it actually does turn the volume up on some things, but so does nihilism, right? Everything is infinitely important. It's the only one you'll ever have. This moment is past, you'll never get it back. For Christians, the moment is past, you'll never get it back. But hey, there's a lot more coming. So the volume gets turned up, and on some things, it stays up. Your eternal choice really matters. What you do with your body really matters. The way you treat people really matters. Some of those systems of value are a real thing. But there are systems of value that mankind, and especially Christians, have adopted that are not good and not given on an eternal timeline.
Sure, but what you're just describing is Christians should live according to the Christian ethic.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm describing orthodoxy.
Yeah, but
I'm simply saying that living with an eternal perspective is important, and sometimes it bears a shocking resemblance to living with a nihilistic perspective.
I don't know about that. Augustine, the idea of that eternity is just the eternal now, the eternal present, right? Meaning gets sort of sucked out of everything in the nihilistic perspective because you can't ascribe anything to it. So the conqueror is just as meaningful or meaningless as the good old, as the farmer in Canterbury Tales.
But it also adds because it is infinitely precious because it's the only thing they'll ever get.
No, but I mean that doesn't. So what? It's not precious. I mean, it's only precious insofar as it means anything. If it's the only thing they're ever going to get,
it means everything. It's the only thing I'll ever have. For the nihilist, this world means absolutely everything because it is the last he will ever have, and it is slowly slipping away from him. Every single moment holds.
So the only thing
for him infinite meaning.
No. If it's slowly slipping away from him, every moment holds anxiety and dread.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And that's what he's talking about. That's
that is not, and that the fact that heaven starts now in the heart for the person who is found in Christ. It is the opposite of anxiety and dread. It is the peace which passeth all understanding.
Yes.
Those are very different things.
Yes, but we get that same assurance of the eternal world, and that death is not coming for us gives this, and getting to be enslaved to a God who really matters gives us the same feeling of freedom that he describes. No, it doesn't matter if I write a book or not. Only insofar as it touches souls for eternity. No, other than that, it doesn't really matter.
Camus says, I will choose or not choose to pay my taxes and suffer the consequences, and those will be mine, but everything is fleeting, and anxiety and dread comes in. And the Christian doesn't say, I will choose or not choose to pay my taxes, because in the light of eternity, taxes don't matter.
Right. The Christian says, I will choose to pay my taxes, not because taxes matter, but because my soul matters.
Yeah.
So I think we're agreeing with each other.
No.
I think we are.
No, because the
Christian... Can you
Christian...
express what I'm trying to...
The Christian has things that he has to do, and there are things that the Christian is not allowed to do. There is nothing that the Camus believer is not allowed to do.
I know. I agree with you. So just let me...
So then how are these things shockingly the same?
We're agreeing with each other.
We are agreeing with each other. So...
Explain.
Oh, man.
So
we have a minute and a half left.
I have nothing. No. Graham, you're arguing against Camus. AJ is putting forward a reinterpretation of it that includes, he's finding the overlap between Christianity and existentialism, correct?
That because we know our eternal end, we can find freedom of movement, especially on an eternal perspective. So should I write an artistic novel or not? He has to prove that it's a worthwhile end because everything is meaningless. I know that everything for me is eternal, and whether or not I write this book, it only matters insofar as it touches my eternal soul or the eternal soul of others. Other than that, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I'm famous. It doesn't matter if it brings me $100. It doesn't matter. I don't need to impress anybody. My world is eternal, right? And so I'm pointing out that the Christian ethic brings some of the same freedom within limits, the same feeling of freedom, not the same freedom to do anything. I think that's where our wires were crossed.
Right.
I don't find the freedom to murder thousands.
The same feeling of freedom.
The same feeling of freedom in knowing that the eternal is before me. For Camus, it was an eternal void that gave him that feeling of freedom. For me, it is eternity itself that gives that feeling of freedom.
So you have a feeling of freedom. Let's say God comes down and picks you up and pulls you towards him in heaven, and in your heart you have that feeling of flying. The man who falls off a cliff has that same feeling for the first instant.
Oh, well expressed.
Oh, cool. Excellent.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. We're agreeing. I think that all I'm trying to say is that there is if we truly wed ourselves to an eternal perspective, there are things that we can freely do without anxiety because it's eternal and they'll be swallowed up in eternity. That does not extend to things that touch the eternal soul. So there are things that are forbidden, and that's what I think you are trying to say, right? There's nothing forbidden to Camus. There are things forbidden to us because eternity is a real
also
thing.
Because of the eternity.
It matters.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
But the stuff that matters is eternal, right? The stuff that doesn't matter is the non-eternal.
Gotcha.
Right?
Yep.
You with me? That's what I'm saying. I think we're agreeing.
Yeah.
Okay. Whew.
Did you?
Did I?
Are you the intro?
I did. Okay. So that was good. If you have...
You probably have thoughts.
If you have thoughts or figured it out, email us at theguys@classicalstuff.net. Is that the correct email?
Yes.
You can tweet us at classicalstuff.net if you can condense your thought into... No, classicalstuff.twitter or whatever it is.
Yep, nailed it. Yep.
If you can condense your thoughts to 140 characters. You can patronize us on Patreon. And there are things there that added things like extra episodes. I'm sure we'll keep talking about this when this episode is done.
Yep.
You can shoot us an AMA and ask us questions about this episode.
We will answer any question asked every month. Yes, and that's it. So thanks for listening. And this is Graham, AJ, and
Thomas?
What's your name? Oh, Tommy Fletch.
Yes.
Tommy Fletch.
Tommy Fletch.
Signing off.
Bye.
Bye.